Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Megan Mahoney. I'm the Deputy Director of Framework at the International Rescue Committee. Framework is a labor trafficking focused training and technical assistance project funded by the Office for Victims of Crime. And we're so excited that you've joined us today for the Ties That Bind Us, a survivor-led discussion on trauma bonding. This event is being recorded, so you can share it with your colleagues. You can use it in your trainings. Please do use it in your trainings and revisit it at any time that it's helpful to you. As soon as we get the chat function up and running, we encourage you to utilize that throughout the conversation to share thoughts, your ideas, and resources with each other to indicate that a particular point has resonated with you, and also, of course, to show a little love for our wonderful participants today, our panelists. Point you have questions during the discussion, you can go ahead and use the Q&A feature. And if you see a question in there that you'd also like to see answered, go ahead and upvote it by giving it a thumbs up next to that question. And we'll address as many of those questions at the end of the discussion as we can. So I'm going to ask James to turn on his camera as I'm introducing him. It is my genuine pleasure to welcome you as our moderator, James. James is a human rights lawyer, a movement strategist, a social entrepreneur. He's been an integral part of passing nearly 100 laws focusing on anti-human trafficking, juvenile sentencing reform, and eliminating juvenile sentences of life without parole. He's also the founder and CEO of Human Rights for Kids and a past Framework Advisory panel member. What haven't you done, James? I don't know. We're so lucky to have you in the field and also leading the discussion today. So please take it away for us.
Thank you so much, Megan, and thank you to Framework for hosting this, as well as many other really important, powerful conversations in the field, specifically for labor trafficking survivors. It's my honor really to be here with the panel that you all will hear from in just a little bit. But before we get started and we go through with a round of introductions, I just want to highlight a couple of things before we get started. First, this is going to be a very difficult, I think, conversation in many ways, in part because you will hear from folks, including myself, who will be reliving some of that trauma that we've experienced and sharing a little bit about our personal as well as professional experiences in the context of having lived through and worked with folks who've experienced traumatic bonds, who were labor trafficking survivors. So there may be folks out there who are watching or listening in who are also survivors of a myriad of different crimes, right? One thing that we know about trauma bonds is that they happen in a lot of different contexts, not just human trafficking. And so some of what you may hear or hear discussed may be a little bit triggering. And so I just want to give that point of reference at the outset. And similarly, for our panelists who will be sharing with everyone today, because it is such a sensitive topic, we're asking that folks provide patience and grace to our panelists who have been willing to share, recognizing that some may need to go off screen at different points during the conversation, and that we all need to just be mindful of that and to provide them, again, compassion and grace as we go through this conversation. And before we get started too, I just want to give a brief overview of a little bit of what we'll be talking about, which is traumatic bonding, which is a phenomenon that occurs with folks who've experienced, a form of trauma or harm where a dysfunctional attachment is formed with their abuser. It's very common in domestic violence situations, sexual violence situations, and amongst victims of human trafficking, right? Particularly when you have crimes that are prolonged over a period of time or that happen on a regular and ongoing basis, trauma bonding is something that can occur. And for a lot of us who experience a traumatic bond to our abuser, it's something, and I'll speak for myself here, that can be very difficult to explain, because oftentimes it's an intense sense of loyalty or love or even a sense of compassion for people who've done terrible things to us. I was 13 years old when I met my trafficker. She was a woman. She was 27 years old. She was the mother of a of a Cub Scout in my Boy Scout troop. And for me, when I first experienced what traumatic bonding was, it came around as a result of a prolonged period of grooming. She was a child sex predator and had groomed me for a period of months before sexualizing the relationship. And shortly thereafter, elements of violence and psychological coercion were introduced. I was slowly over that time period also isolated from my friends and family. And slowly over time, I was willing to give more and more of myself and almost my own sense of free choice and free will, if you will, away to this person, because I thought that it was what I needed to do in order to show how much I cared and loved her. And part of this was, for me anyways, thinking that this was a person who was the only person in the world that really cared for me. And we'll talk more about vulnerabilities and what makes us vulnerable to forming these sorts of dysfunctional attachments. But for me, coming from a house where I didn't have as much supervision as I probably should, having been a prior victim of crimes, helped to create a pathway for an abuser like that, a very skilled groomer, to sort of wiggle her way into my life. And it was at that point in which the bond was formed that I was willing to do anything, and including running away and leaving my family, and living with this other family where I was kept in the state of perpetual servitude, again by being willing to do anything my abuser asked me to, out of a sense of love and thinking that this was the person that was the only person really in the entire world that cared about me. And I was willing to endure physical, sexual violence. I was willing to endure emotional abuse. And it was a very debilitating aspect of my life for many years. And, this was the time when I was 13 till time I was able to leave when I was 16 years old. It was a very intense form of what I believed to be at the time love. I thought I loved this person and that they loved me. And it's a form of attachment that I've never quite had or seen since that time. But I know that it was also one of the worst things that ever happened to me because of everything that I allowed myself to endure in the name of love. And for me, that's, when I think about traumatic bonding, what it means for me is sort of, taking of this precious thing that we're given, love, right? And twisting it in a way that allows people to exert control over others. And in that way, I can think of nothing, more harmful or worse that can happen to a victim than having a traumatic bond that's formed as a result of one's love and compassion. Now that's my experience. And there's a lot of different ways that traumatic bonding can look for different survivors. And so now I'm going to go ahead and ask my fellow panelists to join me on screen, and I'm going to call on them in the order in which I see them. But I really want folks just to go through and introduce yourselves and share a little bit about your experiences, either personal or professional, with how trauma bonding impacts labor trafficking victims. And Bella, I see you first on my screen, so I'm going to start with you.
Thank you, James, and thank you, Framework, for hosting this event and this discussion. James, I'm always empowered and honored by your vulnerability. Thank you for sharing that. My name is Bella Hounakey. For those of you who might not know me, I am a survivor of child trafficking as well. And I'm very interested in being a part of this conversation as I come from both a child welfare background and I'm a mental health professional. So really being a part of this to really see how this experience has impacted me and others in an emotional capacity it's something I'm looking forward to. Thank you.
Thank you, Bella. And Julissa, I see you next.
Hi, I'm Julissa, and I have been working in the anti-trafficking movement, whether it be direct services, TTA, case management, for about 9.5 years now. My experience comes from personal, not just child exploitation trafficking, but also adult. So I'm actually very happy that this is being brought up right now, because it's something that isn't talked about. And when it is, it's kind of looked down, because you can still care for a person that has abused you. So I'm very happy about this. So I'm looking forward to the rest of this.
Thank you. And Syed, I see you next.
Thank you very much, James. Hello, everyone. Thanks to all my friends and their fellows and their staff, and especially to Framework and Mr. James that were approaching to me, and for this trauma bonding program. I'd like to introduce myself. Yes, this is Syed from Survivor Alliance. You can see in my screen that I'm based from the UK. And where is Survivor Alliance is established in the United States, and when they come to the UK, I'm one of them who how the Survivor Alliance is grown up on my hand, and I'm leading a chapter. I'm a co-leader of Nottingham chapter. You can find me in online and my website as well. So yeah, this is very unique and very knowledgeable program, which is I'm expecting, and I think what I don't know how much I can give, but I think I will learn more than that from this program today. And I'm very happy to see my panelist, which is I was spoken with some of the guys before, so it's my privilege and pleasure today to joining in the guys from the United Kingdom. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Syed. And I don't know if Autumn has joined. Autumn, are you on yet? And if you're not, we'll come back to you when she is able to join. I don't see that she's on. So I'm going to go ahead and throw out my first question to our panelists. Instead of calling on people individually, you know, to make sure that this is sort of open and people feel comfortable responding, I'm just going to sort of throw this question out, and so people feel free to respond as the questions move you or as things come up in your mind, you know, related to the topic. But the first question that I have is really related to vulnerabilities on traumatic bonding, and if you all could answer this question, what makes us vulnerable to experiencing trauma bonds or forming a traumatic bond with traffickers, and how does trauma bonding make victims more vulnerable to exploitation?
I like talking, so I can start. I think for me personally, it was when we talk about intergenerational exploitation, we kind of miss where, at least for me in my experience, my family, my parents, my grandparents, my aunts, my uncles, they were also exploited. And so when you see those people close to you and they are caring for and having relationships with people that are actively exploiting them, you believe that that exploitation is normal. You believe that, oh, well, I know I work so many hours, but they could only pay me this much. It's okay, because, you know, they're our family friends. They're the ones that have taken care of us. They're, you know, it's the constable, it's the game warden, it's whoever it is, you know, it could be those people in authority, but that intergenerational abuse that our family members have gone through that make us vulnerable or even more easily accepting of exploitative behavior. At least that's the way I see it sometimes.
Thank you, Julissa. You know, as those of you who have joined us today, many of you, I see that you are professionals in various aspects. If we just think about this on a developmental level, our brain is not fixed. It's not completed at birth. And so we rely upon adults in our life to kind of model and facilitate our growth in our developmental stages. And what ended up happening is that if, as Julissa shared, if the healthy adults or adults were exposed to at onset, at the very beginning of our development, don't have the capacity, don't have the freedom, or didn't have the healthy relationship with themselves, it prevents us from having that with them. And so I think when we talk about vulnerability, we have to go back to, especially with people who are survivors of crime, especially human trafficking, it's really understanding how childhood trauma and attachment problems start with our primary caregivers, because when we are exposed to that negative attachment, it sets up a deficit. And so we're easily preyed on because that deficit was there at very, very early on. And so this it's almost like a magnet. So traffickers, they know how to manipulate, they know how to groom us, and we easily respond to that because we have a deficit. We're functioning out of a deficit at a young age. Our minds were fragile. So you really don't know the difference between love and pain because you don't, it's that cognitive dissonance aspect of it that we're used to at a very young age. So James, I think that's what makes us a lot vulnerable. Not that other people aren't vulnerable, but I think with people who have been, who haven't had the appropriate attachment, especially young people, it makes us easily vulnerable, easily being able to groom by traffickers.
And that's such a great point that you both bring up. I think that, we can't, overstate really the impact that the earliest bonds that we form with our immediate families and the roles that plays in our lives, right? Of what we see as normal, what becomes normalized, as well as what can be part of our own vulnerabilities. I know for me, the sort of the crack that was open in me as a vulnerability was the fact that I, as a very young child, had been sexually abused by somebody in my family. And I remember when I told my mother about this, it was a very difficult thing for her to navigate, I think, in part because she had her own trauma that she was dealing with. But on top of that, because it was a sibling, I think that she really struggled with sort of how to respond. And the response that I was looking for as, and when this abuse happened, I was very young, I was 5 or 6 years old. And I carried that with me up until I was about 11 or 12, when I finally got the courage to tell my mom what had happened. And, because of that response, or lack thereof, sort of as I was interpreting it, when it came up, I grew very resentful. And I developed a sense of, the sense that nobody really cared for me and my family, or certainly like my mother didn't, right? And then when my trafficker came along, it sort of just flipped that, right? So it's like I was 13 years old, right? So I already see myself, right, as older than what I am. I think like I'm this young adult or whatever, and like I can make my own choices and whatnot. But here's this person who's willing to validate what I had gone through, and say things like, oh, if I would never have allowed someone to do that to you or to treat you that way, right? And that sort of like opens up this point of trust, right? I mean, for everybody it's different, right? But that initial vulnerability, that sort of beginning point where things either become normalized or something happens that causes a little bit of pain in your life, especially when you're young, like you were talking about, Bella, is I think something that really can't be overstated as a way for traffickers to really begin to embed themselves in the DNA of people who are vulnerable. And, and I'm curious what you all think about that as well, sort of the, some of those dynamics that play out in terms of the vulnerabilities that the victims have that traffickers play on.
I feel that because part of my childhood exploitation was, one of the means was sexual abuse. So I did not want to disappoint my family, especially I'm Mexican American. So I did not want to have my older brothers know that somebody had dirtied me. And I didn't want them to know that, I wasn't the little princess anymore, because I am the youngest. And when I say I'm the youngest, my the closest sibling to my age is 10 years older than me. So they were already, I don't want to say grown, but in my eyes, they were adults. And for them to know that somebody had done something to me that was so bad that I couldn't look them in the eyes anymore, that was something that my abuser preyed on. They would say, well, do you want me to tell them what happened to you? Do you want them to know that that you're not perfect anymore, that you are not the little girl that they thought you were? And so I can feel where you're saying they created a different person. Like I had a whole different personality that I had to be this strong person when I was out there working to make sure that they could physically abuse me, but they weren't hurting me here. And then in front of my family, I was still this, 10-year-old girl, 11-year-old girl, 12-year-old girl who was still going to soccer practice, who was still, staying the night with her friends, with her cousins. And it creates that I don't want to say split personality, because that's something completely different, but it's a dual personality. And they used my family against me. The family that I know had they known what was happening, they would have protected me, but they made it seem like they would have cast me out. So I get that.
Yeah, can I say something? Thank you very much, Bella and Julissa and James, for you. It's really pathetic, actually, but it's gives us lesson as well. And so, in my point of view, I will go a bit back. When I came to the United Kingdom, I came as a Dutch student, because I was the only son of my parents, and my dad passed away, so my mom is expecting a load that I have a good oath in my country, so that if I could get the degree from United Kingdom, I could do a good career in my UK. I never come here UK for living or for migrant myself, because I was the only person who can look after my mom. So, but I was also passionate about my study. So that's why I come here in a university, and I did my study. I have completed my honors in the UK. But when I come, I got really everything what I wanted. Actually, I got even good job in a good company. They hired me. I got a nice accommodation. I got a sound and consistent, healthy life. I got a sports car at the time, and but once time is come that I have accused false case in my country. So when I heard about this, even my mom passed away, because when she heard about this, because our family background is a very gentle and gentleman. We never harm anyone, or we honestly never harmed by anybody else. So things is, I've been accused, with the Bangladesh or the South Asian, the corruption a lot. You can do anything if you have money or you have political ties. So meanwhile, so I lost my mom, and after that my visa also expired, and also my mom was everything because she's doing financing for me on everything. So when I known about this case, this is the turning point of, I will say, my life, where is I make an U-turn. So within few days my visa expires. I had lost my job because you cannot do work without, and also my accommodation, and my car, just everything, what I have around me in just one night, you can say. And I had applied for the visa with my reasons that what I had. But Home Office, sadly, UK Home Office has denied my visa, and it's looking everything dark around me. And of course, well, the time, if someone giving you a bit light, it seems bigger for you. It's like a sun for you. And someone, I will say, that is my trafficker, come to me as like he's my friend, he's my well-wisher, and offer me a job and accommodation. Said that okay, you are sounds like my brother. I haven't got any younger brother, so you are my younger brother. I will look after you. I will make sure that you got everything and you got your status back. I will help you. So he was where I used to work, he was my regular customer. So I seen always very, just like conversation when he come to when I serve him. So I have to trust someone, and because I have no choice. So he promised me to get me my status of everything, but he was not actually friend, as I say. He just pretending as a friend, and that's how I've been groomed, and I've been with him 6 years because I thought this is the end. My end will be like that because I can't see anything around me. But somehow, it's time by time, I had a good relation because I cannot forget my humanity. Of course, he did lots of bad with me, but I can't do. And I'm always very trustworthy, very honest, very gentle with him, because this is my blood. I cannot change it. So that's how actually I will say that the system is making me vulnerable. And after that, this guy has taken the full advantage of my vulnerability. So thank you so much for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Syed, for sharing that with us. And
Welcome.
I think it's very powerful what you said, because I think it's sort of a common theme throughout all of the experiences that were shared, which is you said that you had to trust someone, and for all of us at some point, right, in our lives, like that becomes something that we need, right? Somebody to talk to share with, to believe that they have our best interests at heart. And that is something, particularly when you're in that very vulnerable state, whatever might be going on in the background of your life, where it opens it up for somebody with nefarious intentions to come in and exploit that vulnerability. So thank you all for sharing. My next question, and we're going to go in a little bit of a different order of how I've structured some of these questions, but to kind of build off of the foundation that we've laid on vulnerability, of what makes people vulnerable to developing a traumatic bond with their abuser. Can the panel, and this is again for the whole panel, whoever wants to share, what is the emotional, psychological, and biophysiological impact of trauma bonding on labor trafficking victims?
I will say ladies first, please.
Thanks, Syed. When we think about, as I was saying, when we think about trauma bonding in sense that, and we define it as when we are attaching or have attached to someone who has continuously harm us, both physically and emotionally, it creates this, in my opinion, this sense of addiction, and sense that there's like ups and downs to the relationship or the interaction. And so even when you're not around these person or these persons, you kind of seek and crave the impact they've had on you. So we know that it rewires your brain chemistry. And so for all forms of trafficking, labor trafficking, as your question asked, I think, I tell people that like trauma bonding, trauma bonding, all of these things have, they leave a trace on your brain, and on your heart, on your body. I think if we look at it, if we put the variables in place in the workplace, it can look like overcompensating, overworking. There's this sense of professionalism, needing to get it right, and having this embedded fear that if you don't get it right, you might be beaten, you might be fired, you might not get the promotion. I think, or this sense of like chronic professionalism. You want to just contribute so much. I've seen it to the extent that although survivors work in a very toxic environment, they are unable to leave because their commitment is to the mission of the organization. They see it as a loyalty to the mission. They see it as their duty to fix whatever deficit that the system has. For labor trafficking victims, at least in my opinion, exposure so far, it's on the flip side of it, on the receiving end, as a victim, you see it as like, it's almost like you've broken me into pieces and only you can fix me. And then when they get out of the life and they are professional, they're in an environment that, you don't break away from trauma bonding, you just learn how to walk with your trauma. You have to repairing yourself almost. But it also looks like overcommitment to the mission, to the point where I see a broken system and I must do anything I can to fix it. I think it's less about the physical harm and the psychological. It changes your whole physiology, like how you think, how you process information. And so I think, James, the most interesting part is that a lot of people who experience trauma bond, especially labor trafficking survivors, it's not hard to see us in spaces where it's almost humanitarian causes, where we are doing something to support some like human rights missions. And likely, we are also working in environments where people sometimes are not good to us. They're not trauma informed. So we accept all sort of abuse and we justify it as, if it's hard, then it's right because we're doing the right thing. And that requires education, that requires acceptance, that requires understanding of what trauma bonding even is, to really navigate yourself out of that. Otherwise, it's a perpetual seeking the same abuse in different workspaces, accepting the same conditions, but really committing yourself to making the change.
I agree. And I think sometimes we need to call out the nonprofit sector, honestly, because it is the third largest work sector in the United States. And it's where a lot of us survivors go and find that peace that we're looking for. And I can tell you, as an adult, I have been exploited in a more traumatic way than I ever was as a child. Because of what happened to me as a child, I needed to fix so it wouldn't happen again to other people. And people who are in a power position, for those of us, we're always going to step down. Us as survivors, whenever we feel somebody is above us, we're going to kind of back down. And it's a way to protect ourselves. We're going to protect ourselves to make sure that we continue to have a job so that we don't become vulnerable. I was lucky enough at the beginning of my entrance into this movement to run into two very amazing people in my life, and they're still in my life today. I won't drop names, but they're still in my life. And they sat there at a conference with me and they told me, you are in a domestic violence and labor exploitative relationship with your employer. You need to get out. No, I can't. What are you talking about? I teach on this. I do training and technical assistance on this. This can't be me now. I am 30 plus years old. You're wrong. And it wasn't until I saw my employer, who was actively exploiting me, not paying me what I should have been paid, when I found out that I was getting paid $6,000 less than everybody else, when I found out that I was the one that was getting sent out on all the out calls, the crisis calls, even though I told them, hey, you know what? I can't go to an out call anymore. I've been on call for 2 weeks straight. I cannot hold another little girl or little boy's hand as they're doing, you know, a rape kit. I just can't do it anymore. It's your job. You have to do it. How is that trauma informed? How is it that we still have people who are exploiting survivors just so that they can say their organization is survivor-led, survivor-centered? How are we still, you know, in positions, and that's just one side of it, where we need to make sure that it doesn't happen to our, at least for me. I will be, and I'm gonna throw a cuss word out there, I will be damned if my kids go through anything that I went through. I will go through it all over again so that they don't have to. And yet here we are sometimes, like when my kids would tell me, Mom, you need to quit. I would rather you go to McDonald's and work there instead of you driving around all over the Midwest. You may not be able to see it, but I'm Mexican. I'm pretty pale, but I am just dark enough to where I'm not wanted in most places in the Midwest. My accent is just thick enough to where it's dangerous for me. And I would get sent out to these places. And those are the trauma bonds, because one, my employer knew the exploitation in the past. And they knew that if they said the right words in the right tone, I would do anything. Oh, but what about your clients? Who's going to help your clients? What's going to happen? So then not only did I have the guilt of failing my family again, but I had the guilt of failing another person's family. So it creates an unhealthy work-life boundary where we are just constantly working around the clock. We're giving our phone numbers to our clients because they can't get through the crisis line, so that, you know, they got to call us for anything. And they're living in crisis mode, which in turn makes us live in crisis mode. And then, like, another one of my exploitations, I am still friends with the person who exploited me because it was my best friend's dad. Where it was, yeah, you can do that. Go ahead and do that. No, you're capable. I don't care if you're trained. You already know how to do it. Go ahead and work the 14 hours. We'll pay you when it comes. 16 years later, and I'm still waiting for that paycheck. But I can't help but love my best friend. I can't help but love her brothers and sisters that I have literally seen graduate high school, like elementary school, junior high, high school. They're off in the military now. I still have that relationship. I still see the person and say, hey, how are you doing? Is everything okay? How was that knee surgery? Regardless of the fact that they made me work until my feet bled. Regardless of the fact that they sent me places that were probably dangerous. And even now to this day, with my nonprofit exploitation, I still make sure that I don't badmouth them. I have been told, you need to drop the name of who did it. No. We need to make sure they don't get funding, because you know what? If they lose funding in the state of Iowa, who's going to help the survivors that are here in Iowa still? And that's always on my mind. So it's crazy the way our brain is rewired to live in constant fear of where we're going to get our next meal, where we're going to have stable housing, where we're going to make sure that the things that we live through, our kids aren't going to live through. In the same time, having that vicarious trauma, having the secondary trauma, while we have our own program participants, clients, or whatever you want to call them, trauma dump on us, see those similarities, and still try to help them. I don't know. Thank you, Bella.
And Julissa, I just want to quickly add something to what you just saying. Thank you for like beautifully summarizing that. I think you said something that I thought was really key, is that the same language that our traffickers might have used, or there's certain tonality in these spaces and workspaces. You mentioned like sometimes your race or gender identity can be used. This is the reward part, and you thinking that your efforts are celebrated, your intelligence, that I got this job by merit, and you're thinking that the rewards, you potentially being promoted, it's based on your merit, but sometimes it's a different form of grooming to make sure that you stay in the organization, to make sure that you are, it's almost like preying on you emotionally. It makes the trauma bonding stronger.
Yes.
And it makes it extremely difficult to get out of it. If you think about the intimate reinforcement of positivity, you get this in here, you get this raise in here, you get this in here, and you're celebrated. There's a cultural show and all of that. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you start to almost rationalize your abuse. It's almost like, there's not enough money, there's not enough people, there's not this, but I'm exhausted every night. And I feel this deep sense of inadequacy. I feel like no matter what I do, I never succeed in here, but I can't leave because they have stuff going on in their families too, and blah. You find a way to empathize with your abuser. That's what we know trauma bonding is. You find a way to justify their actions, and it just makes it very impossible to get away from.
My rationalization was, it's the presidential administration right now that is cutting the funding. It is the states that are no longer have the funding for us workers, but yet it was only my funding that was getting cut. And it's because I was good enough to do the groundwork. I was good enough to go and do the outreach, to go and spend, 10 hours out in the sun doing migrant outreach, the same type of work I did growing up. So I was used to it. But you're used to it. You're used to the Texas heat. It's nothing like Iowa heat, going out there and doing the work. And yet there wasn't the thing that I go back to, it was always, it's your job. And then I looked up my job description, and that wasn't my job. That was part of their grant. That was part of, those things that technically weren't my job, but I was willing to do it. So why not do it anyway, especially since I had done it in the past and I knew what to look for. So in other words, using my exploitation as a means to continue to exploit me while saying that I'm helping other people. So it's crazy. It really is crazy how we can get so locked up and lost in our own mind trying to do the good thing that it makes it difficult for us to say no. I learned to say no with grace, because I learned that sometimes people weren't willing to hear no from me. And I felt bad for saying no. And that is probably one of the best words in my arsenal now is no. I'm not going to do that. No, I'm not comfortable in doing that. And no, you are wrong for doing that. Those are my 3 favorite phrases now.
Thank you both. That's, I think, both very insightful in terms of, what survivors still deal with, right, years after, right, having left that situation, but also the long-term impact, really, right, of trauma bonds, and sort of how it reshapes sort of almost our DNA. And Bella, you said something that was really powerful, which is, it's sort of like an addiction, right? Sort of the seeking and craving of, the thing it is, whatever it happens to be for the survivor, of the validation, right? For me, that's what it was, right? Sort of the validation, the love, like being exposed to the love that I wasn't getting, that became such a powerful intoxicant almost, And again, you know, as a 13, 14-year-old kid, like going through that situation, you're willing to do anything. And you know, for me, this had a lot of you know, devastating sort of impacts, sort of both short-term and long-term. And you know, short-term, you know, I developed, you know, I sort of almost became sort of obsessive compulsive on like a lot of different things. I ended up having to go see a psychologist when I was a teenager, because I was spazzing out about things like my hands not being clean. I always had this thing, because for me, one of the things I was required to do was to clean up and take care of kids. And so one of the things I was constantly doing was always like washing dishes and like washing the floor. And then I developed this thing where I always felt like my hands weren't clean. And it became this obsessive thing where I was like washing my hands all the time. And so it became like very obsessive. And then like, even after that situation, like one of the ways when I did leave that situation, I became obsessive about other things. And so Julissa and Bella, to both of your points, like what you become obsessive about can be the work, right? And so it has these really profound, long-lasting consequences, because it's like you're always searching for that next thing to, you know, to fill that void. And so before we leave this topic, though, any other thoughts, any other things that folks want to add into, you know, just what it is like?
Can I say something, James, if you? Okay, thank you so much. When regarding this question is what is impacting, you know, either is physically or mentally or however. Things is, my trafficker has taken, of course, whatever the documents with me, my bank cards, all my details, and when it was not happen actually, it's just suddenly, as he has, you know, just ghost in your personality, and when they realize that what you have, you know, they take out everything from you, when they make sure that, okay, now he is the doll, you know, and we got the remote from his, and whatever at the bottom we press, now they will, you know, work as we instructed. So when he makes sure that I have no right to live in this country and I have no choice around me, that's it. So he is the final choice for me. Then he started abusing me physically and also mentally. And is happening consistently, constantly in a daily basis, I would say. And what is my experience, including myself, I think that survivors, they got very rich personality, they are in very good character and very good heart. That's why it's very easy to groom them. Okay, and of course they are hurt and their attitude is a criminal attitude. That's how it's very easy for them. It doesn't matter if there's any human being around them. They just treat you as like, you know, not even animals. Even animals got a good right. So when now might be that you guys has can justify that what is impact on me, that how I've been going through. Yeah, I work with him more than 110 hours in a week, and it was 365 days in a year, and even I work in a Christmas day. I never had a day off in 4 years. Never. I've been with him around 6 years. So my traffickers is actually, he pay me 15-20 pounds, which is just only for food, and you have to buy food from his shop, you know, nowhere else, and you have to keep receipt always with you, otherwise it could be disaster, you know. So sometimes he, even I'm talking about past, but sometimes he didn't pay you anything. So this horrible condition that I've been go through, even horrible kind of accommodation I got at the end, and I had a very, as I say, I was a good student, I had a good brain and also healthy life. I've never been to the hospital, I never will, even I had to take the paracetamol before, you know, because I'm happy, I'm healthy, so why should I? But this is the one of the example I'm giving you. I lost lots of skills when I come out from him, you know. And when I was with him, just I waiting for, you know, die or break myself one day to someone will come with the real, you know, helping hand, maybe will give me some empathy and it's really did actually someone empathize me and understand my situation. I never spoke with this guy who has helped me to be, you know, escape. And he reported to the police, and also one of the detectives come, who deal with my case, and she realized that it is actually happening, you know, and I've been rescued by the police. So end of the day, the impact when they come is that I used to be very good speaker, and my English language was very good and nice and clean, sharp, you know, but I forget all these things. Even I have now lots of problem in my body. Is comes from the brain to your body. Definitely to the impact when you are going through with the lots of things, and it is finding that lots of your you know, body protection become low, and lots of illness can work easily in your body. So though I'm dealing with all these things last few years, but I'm still all the essence is around me. But I'm trying to be brave, but I don't know how much. But I'm always suggesting people to be brave, because I cannot. This is the how it should be work. If you are low, if you don't speak, if you don't shout, it's very difficult to find the help in those days, you know. So I'm always trying to making awareness in between the people of United Kingdom and around the world as much as I can approach that we shouldn't allow, we have to be brave, we shouldn't allow this kind of nasty experience to other people. Thank you so much, James, for your time.
Thank you, Syed. And that's a perfect segue into you know, the next question that we have here, which is, you know, how do victims break out of the traumatic bond with their trafficker? What does that process look like, and how long does that take?
Can I say, sorry, panelist, yeah, I have taken lots of psychological support when I come, though the institutional problem in the United Kingdom to get all this support, if you asking from the government, it's not very easy to get it. But as Survivor Alliance, they help me. Also, some of the NGOs, they come forward with the help, and the NHS National Health, you know, Services, which is run by United Kingdom government. And this is, it's very tough. And after all these skills, I realized that we need to divert our attention, you know, in different way, as like you cannot erase it from your past and from your life, but you can divert your personality, you can divert your thinking, your goal in different way. So this is one of the tricks which is I have applied. I'm working in a different sector though at the moment, but it's my passion to stay carry on with the, anti-slavery movements and raising voice for them. And and it's taken a long time for me, but as I say, there are lots of skills though gone, but I'm trying to get the new skills as well, which is I'm look forward. And that's how I change myself to a different personality, though my ambition was different when I started my education, but now is very different. I will say that it's my experience make me thinking for God in a different way, and I'm doing really good. I'm doing really good, but still there is a essence with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Syed.
I can't speak for everybody, but I know, like I had said previously, breaking those bonds is very hard, especially when you have such fond memories, because not every memory that I have with my abuser was horrible. Like I remember growing up with my best friend's dad, and we would have movie nights. So I go back to those and be like, well, he's not a horrible person. And so I don't know if I can honestly answer how we break those bonds, because I'm still actively trying to learn how to not be there still for them. And I know that when you have, to me, I don't believe that trafficking is black and white. It lives in that gray area of life that, it kind of weaves its way, but mostly it's in that shadow life. And I struggle with knowing what happened as a kid, seeing that it was happening to not just me, but everybody that I was around, and then growing up, realizing that it was bad, thinking I'm going to go and fight that fight for, every survivor, because, we're all going to save the world when we first get into the movement. And then seeing as an adult how it can still affect you. I don't know. I can honestly say I do not know how we break out of those bonds, because there's love there, and you never actually stop loving someone. It changes. It's not that passionate love, or it's not that this is my family love anymore, but you still love the person for who they were in the good times, and you can still hate and dislike and be mad at what they did to you in those bad times, at least me personally. So I don't know. You stumped me on that one, James.
Julissa, I thank you again for just your transparency. Always, whenever I interact with you, I'm just always empowered and moved by your transparency. I do think, though, that it is possible to heal from that trauma, but I don't think you break it. I think you create strong boundaries so that your subconscious, you heal your subconscious. I would say that one of the things that helped me distance or walk over that, try to disconnect that neurochemistry that's telling me that there are good memories about my abuser, is to understanding what's happening inside my brain, understanding what happened to me, what I was already exposed to, something that allowed this person to groom me and kept me in the circle. And so I learned about like complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And I think it questions your identity. I think CPTSD questions your identity. I think that's what, at least in my perspective, that victims of trafficking, labor trafficking, sex trafficking, especially labor and whatnot, struggle with most, is that CPTSD. And because for those of you who are mental health professionals, because these terms are not recognized by professionals at large, you don't know where to go get help. They tell you, oh, go to therapy. They don't tell you what kind of therapy treats what you're feeling. And so you end up, it's like a rabbit race. You know something is wrong. You know you have this compulsiveness, you know, and everyone, you're like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I'm intellectual, I have education, I'm intellectual, but why can't I stop and disrupt these patterns? And I think for me, I had to slow down and say, okay, what is going on with me? Then I learned about CPTSD, and I learned about different forms of mental health treatment that would target specific side of my brain so that I can at least cope. And so, you know, I learned about exposure therapy. I learned about eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing, EMDR. I was committed because I refused to be defeated by it. Not because of that, because I was just tired. I was tired of feeling the same feeling and feeling powerless. And sometimes I would have flashbacks. I would say, you know, I was exploited as a child. I have education. Why do I still struggle with this? And I was self-punished. And then I'll be like, you know what? It's just something that I just have to deal with. And I say, no, there's hope for me. And because it's not recognized, CPTSD is not even recognized by DSM-5. Like there are these terms like trauma bonding. There isn't an electrical research that was done to understand the impact of it. And so a lot of what we know is from like borrowed professions and what studies that were done by people who have experienced intense trauma. But if we look at inside of our brain, we notice that we have the same neurons. Our brain is responding the same way as these other people. And so then I start to, okay, if I borrow from people who have experienced domestic violence, I know there's a lot of studying that what works for them. How did they break the bond with their abusers? And Jim, I think that James and Julissa and Syed, I think the most devastating part is feeling like I got just this much figured out. And then I look up and I see that I still have like 1,000 steps left. And I feel like every time I heal, I unlock a different version of my past and I have to heal from it. But I think I am so committed because I refuse to just be defined by those emotions. I just can't afford that. And so I think understanding what complex post-traumatic stress disorder is and what happened to you, then it's like it's multi-layer, is having to heal the little person in you that was hurt and things that your brain were used to and unlearn those. And Julissa, I would say that even now for me, one of those things that I do is when I look for jobs, I look for flexibility. You're just not going to overwork me to fulfill your mission. That's not going to happen. You're not going to assign me more than I can because I need to not be in an environment where I'm constantly triggered. And even when I'm stressed at work, it unlocks certain part about my personal life that I have to have those strong boundaries and do something as small as just like, I'm one of those people, I would take a day off quick. I wouldn't respond, just like those small, because it's so important for me to feel like I am prioritizing my own needs for the first time ever. I'm very strict on what my boundaries look like. I'm very strict on where I experience discomfort and communicating that and recognizing that, you know what, I got here by merit. So no matter what Bella might think about the repercussions that might come if she say no to something, being okay and accepting, regulating myself to know that I'll be okay.
Yeah, I feel that. That's why I said my favorite word now is no. Where before it was like, sure, I can. Of course I can. Yeah, go ahead. Dump that on my desk. I'll take care of it later. I will translate our entire policy and procedure. I will, all of that. No, now it's, no, you know what? I just don't have time. I don't have time for that. And I call it saying no with grace, because the grace is for me. It's not for them. It's knowing that it's okay for me to say no. And now I am in a place where if I feel in any way, shape, or form undervalued, I will take that step back. I am a person that will go above and beyond for any person, just because that's the way it is. That's the way I was raised. That's just the way my personality is. But if I feel undervalued, I then see, nope, this is that sticky line that I'm already towing where I'm going to get stuck there. It may not be exploitation, but I'm going to get stuck towing that line. And I refuse to be there now. I refuse to let my kids see how easy it is to go back, because we don't talk about that, how easy it is to relapse to an exploitative situation. And I can't. I am the only person that these kids have. I'm the only person that I have that can keep myself sane and that can keep myself healthy up here, because we haven't got into the physical things that trauma and even just abuse give us. But my head needs to be good, because I have a bunch of kids. I have 5 kids, a grandson, and a daughter-in-law. So, and they all depend on me. And I refuse to be that person who lives in my experience. I am so much more than what my experience was. And I don't want to be labeled by it, which is why I kind of have issues with the word survivor, or, who rescued you. I did it my damn self. I walked away. I was able to walk away because I was able to realize that that's not what I wanted anymore. I didn't know it was exploitation, but I was able to walk away. And I know that there are situations where people do need to get rescued, but I do not like rescue mentality. And I refuse to let anybody believe that they took me out of the situation. That's why I said I have 2 great people in my life, and they're 2 males who stood there and said, this is what's happening to you. Now that you know, how do you want us to help you? Do you want us to guide you through it? Or do you want us to say something? And I said, guide me through it. Show me how to walk away, but walk next to me. And that's as a case manager, as an advocate, because above all the different titles that I have, I'm an advocate. That's what I am. I will always advocate for people that can't. My dad taught me one thing, and that was that he struggled and he came to the United States to make sure that I didn't struggle. And I have a voice. Having been born here in the US, I was able to speak when others were shushed, but I'm not going to speak for others. I will speak with them. And so that's one of those things that I try to teach my kids, and that doesn't allow me to live in my experience. I have to step away from it sometimes. And that's why sometimes I just don't answer emails, because I'm like, no, that human trafficking person, she doesn't exist right now. She's being a grandma. She's being a sister. She's being a daughter. She's being an aunt. And then when I get back to people, hey, do you still need me? I'm sorry, I needed to take a few months, a few years, because, the world just hasn't been good lately. But yeah, I thank you, Bella. Like that, what you were talking about, I can tell people, but it isn't until somebody tells me that it clicks, because I don't see myself as a victim. And what you just said really let me see that whether I see myself or not, something did happen. And, maybe that is something. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Can I add something with Julissa as well? Within a few words, and what I learned from the Bella and Julissa, and one of my experience with my psychotherapist, I want to share that when she defined my personality, it says one few session is about questions and answer session. You have to go through with all these things, they're just observing you and do all the how they can help you defining the question and an answer. They say she understood that I can't say any no. So she said, that's why this is the things you have to remove from your personality. That's it's okay to say no, and you should say no, because sometimes say no is just raising your voice very loud than no. So this is very important to fit in your personality, and as long as the trauma bonding with the trafficker, and it's just kind of relationship you think about it, that you got someone, your partner, and somehow you are not happy with your partner. So what will we do? You have to leave. You have to leave. You cannot, stay with him or her for a longer period. It's just happened. It's happening to the world. So if you have a bad relation with someone, you just leave and just pray for he or her that whatever she is, her, God bless her. But if she done anything good or he done anything good, should be deserve something punishment, which is Lord will give them, and you also have to go to the court or etc. in judicial process. So leave your trafficker because he was one of your partner, which is not good at all, not good at relationship, just divorce and job done, finding a new partner and go ahead. So that's how I learned. This is one of the skill which is I want to share. So I find it really helpful, and that's how he's just elected or eject from my life.
Thank you, Syed. And I know we're getting bumping up here close on time before I turn it over to Charlie to ask some of the questions from the broader audience. But real quick, in 1 minute or less, I love if folks could answer this real quick question. What is one thing that you wish practitioners, service providers, policymakers, or the general public knew about trauma bonding among victims of labor trafficking? And if everyone can keep their answer to about 1 minute, that would be great.
I guess that we're more than what happened to us. See us as a whole person, not just that part of us, because a lot of the times we are trying to, I don't want to say avoid, but we're trying to get past that. And when you keep labeling us and you keep pointing us and funneling us into this little portion of who we are, you lose the 99.9% of us, because I don't believe that my own worth is just how I was exploited, but it was how I got through it. So yeah.
Yeah, just really quickly, I think first I want to thank all of you who have been doing this work for a long time. It's not easy. It's like having to constantly learn new information. I would say that really for those of you in leadership positions, what message are you relating to people who, if you work with survivor leaders, or if you work with individuals who have experienced trauma in trafficking, in labor trafficking, what message are you sending with your undertone? What is the messaging in everything that you do? Because that need for, I want to support your mission can be easily exploited. You can easily use that to manipulate, even unintentionally. So really, like, what trainings are you participating in? And to what capacity do you actually take these opportunities, these conversations that we have, to apply it, to question your model? Are you open to criticism? Are you open to when survivors give you their feedback that you work with, or do you constantly find yourself in a position where they have to negotiate power with you? Both your actions, overt and covert, really either reinforces that trauma bond or allow them to see what's going on.
Before I forget, I'm sorry, James, I know that we had a minute. Can we stop doing this hierarchy of trauma between sex and labor trafficking? It's like I see that organizations are trying to get us to fight for the same resources that we're entitled to. Human trafficking is just that, human trafficking, whether it's sex or labor. Labor is how we identify, but I think most of us can say that it's human trafficking because sex is a service. So if we can stop this, oh, we only help sex trafficking or we only help labor trafficking, can we just get it and say, if you've experienced trafficking in any way, shape, or form, we're here for you, instead of me having to fight a sister or brother survivor, because we've already been through enough. We can't be pitted against each other, because honestly, that's what our abuser did.
Thank you. Thank you both. Really powerful stuff. Charlie, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to help facilitate. Our Megan actually is going to facilitate our Q&A with the audience. Megan?
I'm giving Charlie a bit of a break. She always does this. But I just want to thank all of you for your candor and tremendous insight into this issue, especially, Julissa, you touched on this a little bit, thinking about the hierarchy of trauma and how the spotlight, especially when it comes to trauma bonding, tends to be around the sex trafficking experience. And so thank you for shedding light on its application in a labor trafficking context. If you haven't seen in the chat, there's so much love for you guys and a lot of really wonderful insights from survivors among the audience as well. So thank you to those of you who are contributing in that space and making this a really rich conversation. Let's continue the conversation. There's some good questions in the Q&A, and if you haven't asked your burning question yet, there's still time. We'll answer as many as we can and then make sure that all of those are addressed in the follow-up. So I want to start with this question about resilience and what protective factors, some of you touched on this a little bit in terms of what helped you. And in particular, as you think about this audience primarily of service providers, what are ways that they can communicate with survivors or interact with survivors who are still sort of captive in that trauma bond or working towards healing?
I think one of the struggles with trauma bonding is the struggle to like cognitive dissonance. You don't know what's real or what's not real. Your mind plays these games where like what looks real sometimes feels like unreal. It feels like not truthful, and what's, it's almost like repainting red flags green subconsciously. And so I think with service providers, transparency in your ethics, and also just, prioritizing transparency and an event that you can't do that, just give survivor the option to choose from a truthful perspective versus mixed messages in the way in which you engage with them, because it just further affirms the confusion. It further affirms that trauma bond. It further affirms that cognitive dissonance where, you're saying that you support survivors, you are for it, your mission is this, but your actions show completely otherwise. And so that alone is contradicting. So I think to your best capacity, one of the ways to restore a lot is to be in a healthy dynamic. So model that healthy dynamic for them. As an institution, as an organization, a service provider, model healthy ways of engaging survivors so that they are not, again, struggling with that cognitive dissonance.
Awesome. I would say respecting their decision. We don't know why a person chooses to stay in their situation. We don't know if they are part of transnational trafficking, if they have someone back home who is being held against them, like as their form of coercion, their force. Respect the fact that just because we don't agree with their lifestyle, just because we don't agree with them staying in that, respecting the fact that they may have a trauma bond, and respecting the fact that trauma bond should be diagnosed by somebody who knows about it and not just heard about it. We shouldn't be dropping that around and saying, oh, that person just has a trauma bond. We need to really understand what that is and respecting it, because what I may think is safe for me may not necessarily be safe for someone else. And just because I don't agree with the lifestyle or that they are still actively deciding to stay in an exploitative situation doesn't mean that that situation isn't actively still working for them in some way, whether it's protecting them, whether it's protecting somebody they love, whether it's the only way they know or whether they believe that they have any type of transferable skill, that is for the survivor to believe, not for us to decide for them.
Can I say something?
Of course.
Thank you, and thank you, Julissa Bella. And I will say that, yeah, what the last word that Julissa say, the respect, yeah. I should say that there's respect in the way of inclusion. You know, you should include survivor because they are one of you. They are one of you brother. They are one of your family. They is one of your friend. And this inclusion is make, I think, more awareness, which will protect us to, I don't know how much is going to be extended, but it will reduce the ratio, the days, which is we are hearing in these days that lots of pathetic stories and lots of things is happening around us. It will reduce down at least, because if you include them, you will find the reality. And that's how I'm very happy that this is the first time we have made a research advisory board in the UK, and I was one of the peer of them, and it's my privilege that they are listening to us, they include us, and they're listening, and we are giving, and it's real fact. And it goes to the up to the United Nation, because I'm doing ethics, with the United Nation, so which is ongoing. So by including, there is a lots of awareness will come to the publics. They will know about it. Even when I don't know about this, is there any law who can protect me and my experience? But now people knows about it because we are working with the universities as well. So lots of the young generation now knows about this. Oh, this is how it is happening, and this is how. And it's coming with a good impact and gesture from the young generation. They knows about it now. So which is, I think, is protecting lots of people, especially I would say because in United Kingdom. So this is the things we should about. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just add in here, going back to the metaphor Bella used earlier about addiction, to the question on resiliency, I sort of, I think it's, at least for me, it's sort of wrapped up in that as well, right? Sort of like if you have this dysfunctional attachment to a person, it just doesn't end overnight. It's a long sort of process, and you kind of go through withdrawals, right? Sort of addiction is a great metaphor in this sense, right? Of this place of like being able to leave, but going back and sort of wanting that sort of that sense of again sort of love and belonging and someone to care for you. And I think for me, where resiliency was built up was in finding that in other more constructive places, right? But it sort of still rubs off on your DNA because you transfer it to other places. So for like me, it was in the context of sports. I really credit my high school wrestling and football coaches with giving me an outlet and helping to develop self-esteem and being people that were willing to sort of step into this place and like provide that love and compassion and support and belonging that I was looking for as a kid. And that became my sense of resilience, and then sort of laid my path out for the rest of my life, really. But it takes a long time to get there. It took me years to break the traumatic bond and to cut off contact with my trafficker, and then to really understand the depth of what I had experienced. It took me years and years of being in therapy, and there's still aspects that I still struggle with, as Bella and Julissa were talking about. And so it's something that never quite goes away, but that's where we really need to support survivors, I think, in their healing journey, because everyone's on a different path, everyone's along a different place in their trajectory, and just being there to provide support is absolutely key.
Thank you all for your responses. I think that's a good segue, James, as you talk about sort of alternative outlets and positive connections elsewhere, there's a question about the potential for repair of ruptures in key relationships, such as with caregivers or parents, that might be healing, restorative, or protective even. I've heard a diversity of experiences as you describe the relationship with your traffickers, some who've cut off the relationship, some who still feel that connection and will always be wrestling with that. So I'm curious what you think about that potential or value of repairing there.
There's the saying, I don't know where this came from, but I've adopted that you cannot heal in the environment that keeps harming you. The same thing, you cannot heal from people who have hurt you, who still has access to you. If anything, it's just the closer you get to them, the longer it delays that, depending on how, even if they're family, people who have literally rewire our brain chemistry based on how toxic and abusive they were to us. I think personally, even if the relationship is repairable, the only way I think to heal trauma bond is by repairing your own child. At least in my situation, the only key that I found able to unlock this pain was to go back and reparent myself, be the child, like be the supportive adult that I needed when I was much, much younger, before my trafficker even had access to me. Because did I feel safe in my environment, there was no way they could have had access to me. But I think also accepting, I think the biggest part of my trauma bonding, at least releasing myself from it, is forgiveness and acceptance. And that's like a daily choice, understanding that there are certain environmental conditions which prevented my caregivers from protecting me. And then accepting that, processing that and accepting it. But I think in parent situation, if it's environmental, you can't do anything about being poor in a country that you don't even have a voice, other than accepting it and just accepting the people who didn't have much. But in the situations where a caregiver facilitated your pain, I think the only way to heal to a whole self is distance. Otherwise, you're going to find your parents and your partner and your co-workers, you'll find the same abuser everywhere.
Any other thoughts on that, repairing that relationship?
I don't, like I said before, I don't know. There's no blanket statement, because for me, each experience was so different, and each abuser was so, whether they were close, super close to me, or whether they were distant. I guess those, like, I'm gonna go back to the caring and the loving. You can care and love for someone from a distance. That doesn't mean they need to have access to your life. That doesn't mean that they need to be an active part of your life. But I think in order to fully heal, you don't need to forgive them necessarily. The forgiveness is for yourself, because we feel so guilty sometimes. Like, how could you be so stupid enough? How could you let this happen to you? When we're, as adults, looking back, that we don't see that we were the scared little kids. We were the ones that, we didn't know any better. We had grown up, at least for me, I grew up seeing these same people do the same things to my parents, to my brothers, to my aunts, to my uncles, that I thought it was normal. And reframing our minds to see that that's not normal. But in a way, I'm kind of lying to myself, because that was my normal. That is the normal for my family, and that is the normal for so many people who grow up in this type of lifestyle. We can't say that it's not normal. It's just not our normal now. And we can accept that, and we can live in that. And we can still look back, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to give that person the same part of my life. I don't blame anymore. I don't hate anymore, because that just leaves me in that cycle. I'm me. That's all I can say. I'm me now. And they shaped who I am, good or bad. And without those experience, I wouldn't be me now. I would still be that person in the fields, that person working janitorial services and not getting paid. So if I can make any difference now, it's going to be in the future. I can't change what already happened.
Well, I want to thank all of our panelists here today. I know I'm going to speak for everybody else in this space here that I wish we had more time. I know there are a couple questions we didn't get to, but we will include those responses in the follow-up to this event. The recording will be available. Thank you, Bella, Julissa, Syed, and James for convening this panel. I know this has been a topic on your mind for a long time. You've wanted to create space for, so thank you for leading us in this discussion. And thank you to everyone who's joined us today, again, who's contributed in the chat. Please fill out the satisfaction survey. Let us know what you liked, what we can do better. We look at everything that you say and take that to heart. And certainly give a lot of love to our panelists here today who have shared so vulnerably and given us some really practical things to think about as we think about our work with survivors. So thank you again to our panelists, and everyone. Enjoy the rest of your week. Bye, everyone.